Right, I suppose we better get started. Two very good speakers. I've changed around the order of who's speaking. Did I consult you? Oh, I did, in consultation with the speakers. So, Joe Leonard, small farmer in County Meath, milking around 600 cows, has been using mixed species since about 2017, way ahead of before it became fashionable. And I'm not saying fashionable in inverted commas now, light-hearted. You know, let's be sure where we're going in this whole game. So Joe will start and give farmer experience what he's been doing to date on this, and then we'll bring in Trevor. I struggle on this sometimes. Trevor Gillihan.
That'll do.
Yeah, because sometimes I try to pronounce the middle like Gillihan, but that would be wrong.
Yeah, it's a long story. Gilly actually means servant too, and it should have been Fillan, not land, because it's of one of the saints. Fillan, who was an Irish saint who moved to Scotland.
That's enough, I'm the chairman.
So there you are.
God, I wanted to just shout.
You did ask.
No, but can you just give it to me? Yeah. Give me phonetic lessons.
And you can have that spelling as well, which is unique as well.
Trevor is a long-established, that's a nice way of saying it,
yeah.
Long-established research officer, person in Northern Ireland in numerous different roles, and at the minute I hear that the university has taken you under their wing.
Yes. Yeah.
Could we have a more excellent person speaking to younger people coming in your footsteps? So that's the lineup. Like a good referee, you're not supposed to notice the chairman at this session, but I intend to change that. So, Joe, we'll start with you in your own time.
Thank you, John. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much to the Positive Farmers and to Paudie Kelly for inviting me to speak to you today. So for those of you that I haven't met, my name's Joe Leonard, and I'm talking on magic mixes or mixed messages. So just a brief introduction. So I'm farming with my wife Mairead in a partnership with a next door neighbour in County Meath. We're a spring calving grass-based dairy herd, or so we like to think, but listening to Blair and Mike, maybe we're not quite as where we should be. I have to admit to some system creep. So we're farming just under 260 hectares in 3 blocks. We have a milking platform of 190 hectares where we milk about 600 cows. With an overall stocking rate of 2.7 this year. It's a little higher. There's the system creep, sorry. Normally we're closer to the 2.5. And we rear some of our own. We rear 100 R1s and 100 R2s, and then we have an extra 50 R1s and R2s on contract rearing. So just where we are, I suppose, just a kind of we're East Meath, so we're in a very dry part of the country. We have deep free draining fine loamy soils, and our long-term rainfall average is about 750 mils, so we're only, that 32 inches of rain. So it's, we are prone to getting dry in the summertime, and it seems to be becoming more regular for us. So multi-species, where to start? And I say accidentally, really. I mean, I'm not, we have been doing it for a while, but it came across my door rather than the other way around, and it came from a trip we did to South Africa. Now, I suppose in true Positive Farmers style, Mike will be very happy to hear that it all came out of a bit of networking, because in 2015 we were after a tough year, the discussion group I'm involved in, the Navan group, took a business trip to Munich and Bavaria in Germany, and in all good style we had a cultural day at some small beer festival in Munich, and sat down in a tent next to people beside us. We found out they were South African dairy farmers, and the most remarkable thing is we managed to keep hold of our contact details to actually arrange a farm trip the following year. So that's really how we ended up in South Africa, completely by accident. And there was the guys we met. They were part of I suppose, similar to a dairy discussion group over there. There was 10 farm businesses, and amongst other trips for that 2 weeks we were down there, we visited 8 or 9 of their farms, and 5 of them were very passionate about multi-species swards. And this is really, I suppose, this was my introduction to it. So you can see the picture there. That's actually grazing herd. They were our first herd we saw grazing multi-species in KwaZulu-Natal in the Drakensberg Mountains. So there, climatically, these guys were looking at their winter drought. They have to reseed their paddocks every year, so they're into regeneration the whole time, just because it gets too dry. And the guys who've been doing this for the long, I suppose 5, 6, 7 years, were very passionate about their savings, and about, they were talking about soil health, biodiversity. But the bit that really, I suppose, caught my attention was the fact that they were saying that they were traditionally growing ryegrass sorts, and they were using between 500 and 700 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. And these guys were saying that after 5 or 6 years growing multi-species, they were growing the same amount of pasture with 10 to 20 kilos of nitrogen at establishment as they were on their ryegrass sorts. So that caught my attention and the attention of a few of the other discussion group members. So when we came back to Ireland, we kind of thought, I need to look into this a little bit more. So a bit of research. It didn't take long to find that UCD Lyons and Helen Sheridan were already 3 years into trial work. So we organised a discussion group. We went up there to visit, and we got they weren't doing anything on the dairy, but even the trial work and the provisional results under the beef and sheep systems were positive enough for me to think, this is worth trying. So my understanding of multi-species, well, I suppose I start by saying it's logical. And what I mean by that is, I suppose when I first started farming, we were all the talk was about looking after the cow. You manage the cow, and then to get the milk, and then it became the focus was much more on grass, pasture sward, graze the grass, breed the right kind of type of cow to harvest it. But actually, if you look at it one step further, maybe it's the soil that was really driving production on all our farms. That's the key to everything. That's the bit that really it drives the pasture production. We've organised, we bred the right cow to harvest pasture, but are we looking after the soils to drive the right production? So we've, like everybody else, have been growing perennial ryegrass sorts for the last 20 odd years, and I say it's easy because it's a straightforward system. You plant it, you spread your nitrogen, grass grows. If you get weeds, you spray them. Straightforward enough. It's easy, you set your stocking rates and away you go. But from what I understand, that biodiversity is the key to soil health, and if you're growing a monoculture of a ryegrass sward on top, you only have a monoculture of roots underneath. And every set of roots and every has biological activity. They have certain enzymes, bacteria, that work on soils, or they work on the roots. And if you've only got one type of roots, well, then you've got a limited number of bacteria, enzymes, and whatever to work on in the soil. So multi-species have a far greater number of plants on top, so they have a far greater root variety in the soil. So you get a far greater number of enzymes and bacteria and so forth working in the soil. So hopefully you can then utilise, the logic is that you utilise more of what's in the soil. There's also the mechanical benefits of deeper rooting plants. My next slide I'll show you, the ryegrass is a very shallow enough rooting compared to some of the other plants, so you're utilising quite a small part of the soil horizon. And the deeper rooting plants, we hope, are translocating more minerals from further down, bringing them up to the top of the soil horizon. They deposit more organic matter deeper into the soil horizon where the organic levels are lower. And they also, they can utilise water for longer, so they're more drought resistant. So here's just a quick slide, and I don't know if you can see, I think this pointer will work, but if you look, the second on the left over here, that's roughly the root depth of a perennial ryegrass plant. So you can see, compared to a lot of the others, if you take the ryegrass and even here clover, red and white clover, they're all quite shallow rooting in comparison, whereas with the multi-species, we're growing cocksfoot, and I know that's, myself, I was took a bit of getting used to putting that back in the sward. But cocksfoot, you can see it's considerably deeper rooting, so it's using far more of the soil horizon. Timothy, and then also over here, the herbs that we're planting, chicory, ribgrass, that's plantain, yarrow, burnet, sheep's parsley. So you can see they've a far, they utilise far more of the soil horizon, so they're able to utilise much more that's there. They can also deposit, as the roots die off, they deposit organic matter much deeper into the soil, so it's more, I suppose it's better locked up. So my first attempt, First attempt was in 2017 when we came back from South Africa, and having been to Lions, I was keen to have a look at it. Now we planted 30 acres of multi-species in 2017, and I put it down as a failure. We did make a bit of a mess of it, and we have a grass sward left. But I suppose a couple of things. It was newly leased ground coming into the platform. It wasn't, so it had been in tillage for a long time, 30 years plus, I suppose, before. On paper, the pH and the P's and K's looked good, but there was no organic matter in the soil. The soil structure was very damaged, I suppose, from years of heavy tillage. We got onto the soil. It was late in the season in 2017 when we sowed it. We didn't get permission to get in until late July, I think early August, so our first grazing wasn't until mid-September. Then, I don't know if you remember, the autumn of 17 got very wet, so we were due to graze again in November, and we said we'd leave it rather than damage because it was a soft sod. So we left it to 2018 instead, carried probably too much cover over the winter, and then we all know what 2018 brought between the snow and a wet spring. So we kept trying to defer the grazing until we found the soil conditions were better. And eventually we ran out of feed and everything else. We had to graze it in the first week in April with standing water in the paddock, which didn't. So we pretty much did as much as we could to get it, and you can see even in the picture there, that is actually rape seeds. I think the plant that came up. So it wasn't sown. It was already, the seeds were in the soil. So even on our first grazing, the cows went into the first paddock. They grazed all around them. They didn't touch the rape plant at all. Second paddock they went into, they kind of started nibbling away and thought, oh, that's not too bad. Third paddock skinned it to the floor. So we thought, oh, that's grand. So we put them back in the first paddock and we'll clean off the rape and we'll never see it again. And sure, we cleaned off all the regrowths on the chicories and the plantains and everything else. So anyway, by the end of 2018, we were back to a ryegrass sward. So there you go. So long-winded way of saying we made a complete mess. It was a long learning curve. Anyway, 2018 was a bad year, with the drought and everything. We didn't re-sow anything. So from 2019 onwards, we've been sowing multi-species around 40 acres a year. So we've roughly 160 acres sown at this stage. So this is it's roughly a 13 kilo mix. 8 kilos of grass seeds. So 5 of that would be a ryegrass, 2 different ryegrasses, a diploid and a tetraploid. I don't know if you can see. And then 2 kilos of timothy and 1 of cocksfoot. 2.25 kilos of clover, 1 of red and 1 1/4 of white clover, and then 2 3/4 kilos of herbs spread between the chicory, plantain, yarrow, burnet and sheep's parsley. And that's costing us roughly, in 2021 it cost us, I think, around €110 an acre, so it's a little bit more expensive than a ryegrass sward. But then last year the government brought in the subsidy, the multi-species subsidy of 50 quid an acre, so it makes it, it's not an expensive part of the thing, the seed mix. So for establishment, so what are we actually doing? So we tried, I suppose, weeds are a big issue with multi-species because, as far as I know, I haven't come across any post-emergent sprays you can use. So you want to make sure your plaster is as clean as you can before you start. So we try to identify paddocks the season before that we're going to spread our sow multi-species in, and spray them a couple of times to reduce to clean off as much of the weed burden as we can. We're then sowing in mid-April, end of April, just as the soil temperature comes up. So we'll try and we'll sow it directly after a second grazing. So we'll graze the paddock twice in the spring, and then we'll burn it off. So we're not ploughing and tilling. We're just a direct sow with a little. It's an Aitchison T-stem seed or whatever, but it sows the seed in a kind of almost a little tube rather than a slip seeder. So because of the seeds, there's a great variety in seed sizes. So we're sowing with that. So we'll finish grazing on one day. We'll spray it the next day, and we'll sow it the day after. Just to try and, we've actually in one case just 2 years ago, trying to get ahead of the rain. Cows came out of the paddock that morning. We were spraying by lunchtime, and your man was in sowing at 7 o'clock that evening once the seed had gone dry, and perfectly all right. It came up for us. So we'll then put 3 ton of lime on, because we've always done 3 ton of lime when you're doing a reseed. I don't see any reason why to change that. It helps to burn off the trash and keep the topsoil, the pH right. We apply 3 bags of 10-10-20. There again, I suppose it's what we've always done with any other reseed, and it's worked. So we use that to help establish the the grasses and get the initial seed going. And then after that, no further fertilizer for the year. And we'll usually get our first grazing 6 to 7 weeks later. So we're usually in kind of mid-June is when we get back into grazing, or second half of June. So, and then our management of swards for the subsequent season. So at the moment we're sowing, I suppose we're giving it about 80 units of nitrogen, about 100 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. It's either, so we'll either go between January and March. It'll either be a bag of urea over 2 spreadings, or else it'll be some slurry, or depending on pasture cover as to whether we put slurry or urea out. And then we'll normally go with about 2 bags of 18-6-12 in the first week in April, top up the P's and K's, and after that our paddocks are getting no more nitrogen. And we'll adjust the lime P and K just to match our indices, though most of them are 3 and 4 anyway. So that's giving that gives our multi-species swards on an annual basis, I suppose, about 80 units to the acre, which is, I suppose, 100 thereabouts, 120 something units per, or kilos of N per hectare. So the overall farm, how does that relate? Our perennial ryegrass swards are getting 250 units per acre, or roughly 300 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. And between the two, that brings at the moment, it's bringing our farm average down to about 186 units, or 230 units of nitrogen. So as we progress with this further, it brings down our farm average too. So what are we getting from that? So this is grass measured. We're measuring with a plate meter. One could argue that there might be differences in dry matter in the content, but when you're measuring heavy multi-species swards, it can be a little hard to adjust to get it correct. But we're measuring the same as we measure the rest of the farm anyway. So these figures are that. So if you look at, now it's a little complicated, but on the left, the columns in red are actually what the pastures were growing the year before we resowed them, just as a ryegrass sward. So you can see the first 4, now we sowed them in 2019, so that was their growth in 2018. Okay, that was a drought season. Then there's the first season of multi-species where their pasture's out for nearly 2 months of the season, so that's why down, and then subsequent growth. So you can see for the 4 paddocks we've kind of grown each year, and then across the bottom line here, that's the average of the perennial ryegrass swards on the milking platform. And then the bottom is the average of the multi-species from year 2 onwards, because I've taken out the year 1 just because there's usually there's such a drop in growth in the first year. So you can see, in 2020 our multi-species actually outperformed but there was only 4 paddocks. So, but in general, 2021 and 22, our multi-species paddocks are down 600 to 800 kilos of dry matter compared to the ryegrass swards. So what are we finding? So performance from our cows, we're not seeing. This is just what we're doing. We're not. There's no research going into this. We're trying to manage it purely as we would the rest of the farm. So we're not trying to do anything special with it. But we're not seeing any lift or drop in kilos of fat and percentage of fat and protein kilos or milk solids. Cows are very happy grazing it. We've no sward rejection. Initially, we thought there was a little bit of preference away from the plantain, but that seems to have, cows go in and graze it quite happily. Bloat issues, which are always a big concern for farmers, particularly on a clover-driven sward. We haven't had any bloat issues. I suppose over the 4 years we've been doing it, we've found 2 cows dead on multi-species pastures. But 600 cows over 4 years, you're going to find them. You're going to find the odd one that's turned their toes up, unfortunately, in different paddocks as well. In both cases, they were the 3rd or 4th grazing on the multi-species, so it wasn't as if they'd gone in on fresh clover either. So I don't think necessarily they were. I can't say they weren't bloat, or they were, but we haven't had bloat issues. So we would graze them. They would join the rotation. We would graze. I suppose we would graze at a higher pre-grazing yield. And on a slightly longer rotation, because the chicories and the plantains need a little longer than the ryegrass to rejuvenate root structures between sward one. So we're typically, if we're on an 18 to 20 day rotation for the ryegrass, we'll probably be on a more like a 25 to 27 day rotation for the multi-species. So they're hopping in and out, and we're probably grazing at a pre-grazing yield of, instead of somewhere like 15 to 16 and 50, 1700. We're probably grazing at 2100, 2200, something like that. We'll use a strip wire at certain times of the year, depending on grazing conditions and whatever. And we find that we've traditionally tried to avoid making bales. We'd have rotated the surpluses to different paddocks, but this year we ended up having to make bales. We made on a couple of the paddocks, and they made very well. The cows delighted with them. So it'll be something I'm less concerned about going forward. So pros for me, the obvious one is the financial one. And you can say, that's really down to the clover, and that's driving the pasture production. My maths, it's quite, please forgive me, it's a bit crude, but if we take, just using last year's figures, urea at 1,000 euros a tonne, that's roughly 1,000 euros to 460 kilos of nitrogen. So if we're saving 220 kilos of nitrogen a hectare, that's roughly 480 euros a hectare a year saving in nitrogen. Even if fertiliser comes back to 500 a tonne at half that price, you're still talking 220 euros per hectare saving, which more than covers, or pretty much close to covering, the pasture drop if your reduction in dry matter grown. So for us, at best, at worst, I think we're breaking even. I think we're probably doing slightly better out of it. And then the others, we do have a bit more drought resistance, as you saw from the slide with the rooting depth. You can see a lot of particularly the cocksfoot and the herbs, they'll continue to grow longer than the ryegrass when the weather dries up, and that's particularly where we are geographically. It is important for us. Biodiversity, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, soil health improvement, animal health improvement, I put question marks all over those. Logically you'd think there has to be. On our system, it's very hard to show that there are. We're not a research farm, so we're not technically looking into that. Anecdotally, you drive through the paddocks with the multi-species in the summertime. There's definitely there's far more insect life in the swarts. Carbon sequestration, if the roots are going down deeper into the soil, there has to be more being sequestered, but how do you quantify that? There has to be a soil health improvement through to the increased biological activity within the soil. There again, we're not. And you'd have to think there's an animal health improvement because there's far better mineral balance in the sward, but there again, it's... So for us, the cons, what's wrong with it? Weed control is a huge issue, certainly. There's no post-emergent sprays, so if your paddock isn't clean, it's a knapsack, and everybody loves a knapsack, particularly when it's 32 degrees or something in the summers we're getting these days. But we are, we'll even have, we're normally year one of paddocks are a reseed, we'd be out after the first 2 or 3 poor grazings with an knapsack, just trying to knock down the buck thistles, if nothing else. Grazing rotation length, it is longer, so you have to jump and change a bit more with the rotation to match pasture production. Grazing residuals, we're trying to leave them higher, so we're aiming to leave kind of 150 kilos or 200 kilos. So that takes a bit of adjusting too, because we found over the first couple of years, if you're grazed too tight, you lose the chicory, the plantains. You're going to lose. Unfortunately, they seem to die out anyway. But we think grazing them too tight is causing them to die out quicker. And I put down the aesthetics. It doesn't look the same as looking across a nice ryegrass sward blowing in the wind. One is still prone to looking at it and thinking, and I've been looking at it for a few years, and I'm still getting my eye around it. Persistency of species. There again, as I said, the chicory, the plantain, the yarrow, it's a tiny, fine plant, but it's only a very small part of the mix, but it seems to be hardy as anything. It stays there quite happily. And then docks. If they get in, we've actually, of the 160 acres that we've sown, this summer we actually had to spray out a paddock and a half because the docks just completely took over. So we've got 2 paddocks that now just joined back into the ryegrass sward. We did last autumn, they were fairly open. We'll see how the grass is tilled in this winter and see if if it's still fairly open, we might stitch in some more multi-species into it next spring. But if it's tilled out, we'll probably just take it back into a conventional paddock. Thank you. There's a far greater density of multi-species.
I thought they were gone to the Golden Globes.
now, end of September, we're just grazing it for the 4th time since it's been resown. And you can see that certainly there's a good number of the chicory plants have gone to seed. That's probably a reflection of us trying to slow down the rotation too much, just to try and build some cover now once the rain came in September. You can see where the cows have been grazing. They've just gone into milking, so you can see where they've been on today. It's visually very different after cows have been grazing in pastures compared to a normal ryegrass sward, so it's just something we need to get used to with a multi-species sward. Sorry, can we just stop that one there? Sorry, the audio was a bit, for me anyway, I don't know if you couldn't hear it really, but I suppose that's a first grazing sward. Video was taken at the end of September this year, just after, and as I was saying, we'd been trying to extend the rotation after the long dry summer, so you could see certainly the chicory plants had gone to seed, but that was, and you can see this is a post-grade. The cows have just gone in off grazing that, so you can see what's left. There's a higher residual on the sward there, so it's really just to show it's a different visual, it's a different aesthetic to what we're used to grazing. So, and this second video here, I don't know if you'll be able to hear. That was sown in the spring of 2019, so it's just finished its 4th grazing rotation or grazing season. This was there again taken the end of September. It had no fertiliser since the first week in April either. So even you can see how green the sward is there. So sorry, thank you. We'll play that one, it'd be great. So this paddock we're in is paddock number 21. It's multi-species reseed that we put in April 2019. So it's just finished its 4th grazing season. As you can see, compared to some of the other paddocks, a number of the species have died out, particularly the chicory. There's barely a plant. There's 1 or 2 plants left. There is a little bit of plantain, but as you can see across, there's still quite a smattering of red clover, as well as plenty of white clover. This paddock would have had no nitrogen now since the first week in April. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Thank you.